thing that I hope to have for the rest of my life is that dopamine driver of feeling that high when I accomplish something that affects other people in a very positive way. Giving opportunities to my team the same way that I had opportunities throughout my career, is super important to me, and that's one of the most fulfilling things I can do in life. I'm very extroverted in public settings. When I had an opportunity to talk to somebody from asset living, and I was asking everybody I knew in the industry what asset living was. At the time, it was called asset campus housing because I had never heard of them. When I joined, we had 55 properties. I think in 2017, we were up to 220, 230. And now, when you layer in everything that we've grown on the multifamily since, we sit at about 1,650 communities and 300,000 units.
What does that feel like?
Gosh, that's such a good question.
Alex Abernathy discovered his passion for real estate unexpectedly while working part-time at a student housing community during college. 14 years later, he's helped transform asset living into a nationwide operation with over 1,600 communities and 300,000 units. As head of marketing at Asset Living, Alex champions what he calls national scale with a boutique presence. His journey has shaped his philosophy that true fulfillment comes not from material success, but from creating opportunities for others.
I look back and I think sociology was probably my favorite course that I took, because I love studying human behavior.
Why is that? Because I love that too, for some reason. I just find it so fascinating.
Can't point to why. It's just...
Property managers lose hours chasing rent, while delinquency and filing costs add up to massive losses. The financial impact? Millions in unpaid rent sold to collections agencies that recover just 20 to 30%, while taking a huge cut. Now, the Kelsey you trust for leasing helps you recover more rent in-house, reducing reliance on agencies and maximizing revenue. With Collections AI, Kelsey automates rent and move-out collections, from the first missed payment to move-out, while ensuring compliance across jurisdictions. Easily train and set up Kelsey on your company's collections process, including CARES and state-regulated workflows. She doesn't just set reminders. Kelsey answers resident questions, tracks promise to pay dates, and follows up persistently to keep payments on track. Need oversight? Corporate teams can monitor collections in real time with Zuma's dashboard, while site teams use the Chrome Assistant to track payments and even respond as Kelsey when needed. Kelsey also evaluates resident risk with AI, providing instant insights to help you make smarter renewal decisions. The impact? Doubles collections velocity, reduces filings, cuts site team workload by 85%. Stop leaving rent revenue on the table. Let Zuma's Collections AI handle the heavy lifting while you focus on what matters. Get started today.
Worried about the approachability.
What do you mean?
Like becoming more of a voice in the industry. I think it becomes really intimidating to walk up to you now and introduce myself, at least for certain personality types.
Yeah.
Like I feel like that's the issue with celebrities and people that kind of go viral and become famous, is that somebody that you would normally walk up to at a bar and introduce yourself and ask, what do you do for a living? There's more information out there now about you, that people understand you a little bit more. There's less icebreaker questions. There's probably some hesitation when it comes to approaching somebody that in the industry. I know there are some figureheads, there are some voices in the industry. Ryan's probably become one of those just through his own efforts. And I know he struggles with the ability for somebody to come up and approach him.
Really? He does? That's interesting. I never thought about it like that. In some ways, I actually think about it in the opposite, because it almost allows somebody to approach you with something, right? Mm-hmm. So for example, if people watch your podcast episode and they see you at a conference, it almost gives them the right to approach you in a way that otherwise would be different. Like let's say, you're at Asset Living and, let's say it's a vendor and they want to, get something from you or get a meeting. At least now they can approach you and be like, oh, hey, I watched your podcast. I really loved listening to you. And, here was my favorite things. I feel like it gives you a hook to actually approach somebody in some ways. Yeah,
no, that's really good perspective. I'm probably a little bit more introverted than extroverted, although, I'm very extroverted in public settings.
By choice?
Yeah, by choice. I mean, I think it's just how I grew up. I grew up as the youngest child. I mentioned to you, my sister's 9 years older than me. My brother's 10 years older than me. So I came as a bit of a surprise later on in life, I think, to my parents. And so I grew up being in settings with older individuals, wanting to be included, kind of tagging along with my brother everywhere I was allowed to go or he would tolerate me to go. And I think that set me up to be a little bit more socially engaging. But I think that there's a limit, and there's certainly certain personalities, and I fall into a category where there's a limit where I can go to a Napa social media summit or I can go to NMHC and I can pack in 70 meetings in 4 days, and I leave from there and I need 4 days to recover from it, just from a pure social interaction.
Yeah. It drains you
Yeah.
in some ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
But I look back to my college experience and the curriculum that I studied throughout, and some of those general education classes on the front end were some of my favorite, because I look back and I think sociology was probably my favorite course that I took, because I love studying human behavior. And when you kind of look into it, going back to the point of having some sort of hesitancy or fear to approach a public figure. Earlier in my career, I probably wouldn't, if I had known that you'd done, 10, 15, 20 podcasts, you become more of a voice in the industry, like maybe in this right setting, I would approach you, but I would have some serious fear to do that. I feel like that might be something that you have to consider.
That's interesting. I never thought about it like that, honestly. I thought about it more in the sense that, like, as people get to know you online, you're just able to build relationships with people because you're more approach. I didn't think about it like that. So we'll see. Obviously, I'm not famous at all, but if this podcast does become something that people watch, it'll be interesting to see the reactions, like when I go to a conference and all that. So we were talking, I think before we hit record, about Ryan's like experience. So you were saying like his experience it's harder for people to approach him.
I think so. I mean, from an outsider, like, trying to take a third party perspective, I think so. I get a lot of questions about what's Ryan like. Is he what he is on LinkedIn? In a lot of ways he is. In a lot of ways he really has to force himself to be more forward facing and share his thoughts on leadership and share his thoughts on culture, which he normally wouldn't do, but he's genuine and authentic, which is really important. Ryan's background is very impressive. When you think about second generation companies, 90% of them fail, and probably less than 1% of them grow at the rate that we've grown since he's taken over.
Oh, I didn't know it was second generation. So his father
was he started very early in the business. About a year in or so, he came on to Asset. It was called Asset Plus Corp at the time. It was a savings and loan days business. We managed anything and everything. We managed for a bank primarily. Over the course of 20 years, we kind of transformed more with a focus into the living space. We were in multifamily, got an introduction to student housing, really shifted a lot of focus to student housing. And his dad took us through that entire transformation. He ended up, unfortunately, the original founder passed away unexpectedly. And so he ended up taking over the business, buying the business out. Built it into more of a living space focused business. In the early 2010s, we moved away from commercial and office management, just focused on multifamily and student. And that's really when our student side started to blow up. And for about 10 years or so, we focused almost exclusively on student while maintaining a regional presence here in Texas for multifamily. In 2018, his dad was ready to just focus on development. And we had a development arm at the time. His dad was really running that side. Ryan was running the management side. Ryan decided to buy his dad out so that his dad could kind of go off on his own and just focus on developing 1 to 3 multifamily and student communities a year, kind of keeping a relatively small family shop. And Ryan took took asset living into what it is known today on the multifamily side, and we kind of shifted focus.
Wow. I had no idea. I think you said 90% of second generation businesses fail. And I bet that's true. We've talked about this on the podcast before. I've talked about it with Spencer Raskoff, who's one of the founders and former CEO of Zillow. My question to him was, when you build something big and you have children who are kind of falling into this position of you being extremely wealthy, extremely successful, etc., how do you raise a kid to still have that ambition and drive? And it's a super hard thing to do. So I think it's pretty fascinating to see that like Ryan not only didn't fall into that trap, but like excelled at it. And I think there's like other examples. Like I think Kobe Bryant's dad was he was a professional basketball player, and I don't know if he was amazing, but obviously Kobe Bryant is Kobe Bryant. I don't know like how to solve that problem. Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, another one is Mav McNeely. If you follow golf, he's on the PGA Tour. Grew up in a very successful household, had a lot of opportunities, but similar to Ryan, work ethic drives all. And I think if you can instill work ethic in your responsibility of being a parent, it's really instilling work ethic and showing that there is a lot of fulfillment in that side of life. Ryan's background was that he was a collegiate soccer player at Vanderbilt, graduated in 3 years, ended up going to Goldman Sachs, didn't really want to be part of the business, but kind of grew up in the business, so he was very familiar. His dad ended up putting the sales pitch on him and getting him to leave Goldman, kind of come back to the asset side, come back to the family business. And I think in his motivation and his work ethic, he's never going to be somebody that's just going to clock in and clock out. When he does anything, he does it 110%. So it was really interesting and a lot of fun to watch that, because I joined the organization in 2011. And
how big was the company by unit?
Oh, I love this story. I love this experience because I was coming from the student side, working through college at my college apartment. I had an opportunity to work for some of the larger organizations in the student space and multifamily space throughout that process. And when I had an opportunity to talk to somebody from asset living and they were interested in bringing me on, I was asking everybody I knew in the industry what asset living was. At the time, it was called asset campus housing. What asset campus housing was, because I had never heard of them. When I joined, we had 55 properties on the student side and a very, very small regional presence here, kind of in Texas, primarily around student. If I had to guess, we had maybe 100 communities in total. In kind of watching the transformation of the business of us taking student from 55 properties to, I think in 2017, we were up to 220, 230. And now when you layer in everything that we've grown on the multifamily since, we sit at about 1,650 communities. Wow. and 300,000 units. And, we expect that growth to become even more exponential this year.
What does that feel like? The reason why I find that so interesting is it's more, I'm in the startup world, right? So everything that we do is taking something that like doesn't exist and like growing it as fast as humanly possible, right? So everything is breaking all the time. There's always issues, and you're just like forcing growth, right? The analogy I think of, or the meme I think of is, you have like a train track and you have like, you're like on the train track, but you're building the train track as you're going, and the train is just going, and like you have to like build the train track while you're going. And it's not as common, I would say, to have or even sit down with people on the multifamily operator side and hear stories like this insane growth. So what did that feel like, I guess, going from 55 to 1,600 communities?
So that's what I fell in love with at Asset. I loved that there were documented ways of doing things, but that wasn't the only way. And as we were building the organization, we were optimizing process, and we were finding new ways that we could differentiate ourselves, not trying to take a super in the box approach, I'd worked for other firms that essentially had a playbook, and whether it was on the student side or the multifamily side, it didn't matter if you were in Gainesville, Florida, or you were at University of Washington up in Seattle. You were effectively running the community the same way, and building marketing strategies around the same kind of fundamentals. And that was the thing that attracted me and really kept me at Asset early on, was that it is an open playbook. The story's yet to be written, and that's how we've always looked at it. And that's how I lead my team now today is, I'm happy to sit down with you and go through step by step how I would do it. But you don't have to carry that out exactly how I did it, because the difference in perspective is the reason why we work together. If you're just going to be another version of me, we are not going to be effective at all, and definitely not be a diverse, high-performing team. So I really love that about us, and we've kept that culture. We say we have national scale with a boutique presence, and we truly live by that. We manage the redundancies really well from a centralized platform, but our local strategies differ greatly. And it's almost like if you walk into one of our communities, you're probably going to have hopefully a very good experience, but a much different tailored experience if you're in our Southeast platform versus our Southwest, or Midwest and Central platform, or up in Denver. And the reason why I love that is to my point earlier about just loving consumer behavior. People regionally, they're passionate about different things. They have different value matrices on what they're looking for from just their day-to-day life, but especially their living experience. And so having that open book has been really important for me.
How does a company maintain a national presence with the boutique experience? I think that's super challenging, right? And what comes to mind for me is one of investors' pet peeves on the tech side is like, you want something that's scalable, right? Mm-hmm. Because you want a business that can scale and grow, and the more you customize or personalize an experience for a customer, the harder it is to have that like rapid scale. So like, what are the challenges that come with having a boutique presence?
Yeah, so we're a 100% third-party manager. And so we are effectively whatever our clients need us to be, but we also have pretty strong core moral values and ethics that we need to be renter first when it comes to our management philosophies. What I feel like is meshed well with our organization is that we've not only grown organically, but we've also made strategic acquisitions to be able to open up our presence across the United States, and acquired some very reputable, or I should say acquired, I like to use the word partnered, because that's kind of how we treat it. Some very reputable, well-established organizations in Phoenix and Denver and Atlanta, and kind of covering all the Southeast and Mid-Atlantic, as well as here in Texas. And our philosophy is that we want to mesh those cultures. We're not going to partner with a firm that has a vastly different culture from our own. It's been primarily matriarch, patriarch, kind of privately owned companies without succession plans, and they want to do something for their employees to keep them employed and working towards the vision and passion that they love. And so that's where the partnership is really mutually beneficial. But we want to adopt in a lot of ways a part of their culture as well. We don't want to force anything on anyone. And I know that there are some other firms out there that have taken different strategic approaches where from day one, you are now an employee of our organization and this is how you're going to do things. I think people are afraid of change, and we have to manage that as we've grown. And so we want to be a little bit more collaborative with them. And that's driven us towards being able to still maintain that boutique approach.
So do you have now a playbook to run an acquisition, or is every acquisition really unique?
I would say from my standpoint, every acquisition is unique. We have a better playbook today than we did 6 years ago. We've learned from our bumps and bruises, and we have a lot of battle wounds. But that's always just a foundation on what we're going to do better next time. So as much as we have a much better playbook, it is still unique, and it's unique based on the regions that we're entering into. It's a lot easier to be able to, we made 3 acquisitions in Atlanta over the past 6 years or 5 years. It's easier to be able to build a playbook for something like that because those companies knew each other. They had a lot of, very similar operating philosophies. But when you're then acquiring something in, Denver or in the Southwest in Phoenix, or now kind of, looking even further west and kind of into the Midwest and looking further north, those people are different people. They're unique, and they have unique cultures. They have unique philosophies. So we have to be open when we walk into that. And I would say that in my experience, observing and being part of this, we want to make sure that we don't change anything on day one. We only want to enhance what they have, from a resourcing standpoint, from a support standpoint, from a training standpoint, and be able to make that organization better as we make our own organization better.
What is the process like, I guess? And how close are you to the acquisition process? Are you fairly close?
Yeah, just heading up the marketing team, I'm hopefully one of the first in the door to be able to start working with those groups. I've always said, I work very closely with our business development team. And I've always said to the business development folks, like, we have to get in there on day one and we have to integrate them into a part of our team. We can't let those individuals feel like they're on an island or they don't know what's coming next, because personality wise, business development and marketing are typically the loudest in the room. They're the most outgoing. They're the most extroverted. And if we can mesh and bond well on that front, then that can become contagious throughout the rest of the organization, all the way down to accounting or some of the admin staff that may not be as forward facing and may be a little bit more introverted or siloed within their organization. You can see it spread naturally. So from an acquisition front, my involvement is really being able to go in and integrate the teams, start working with the teams from day one.
So if you were to weight the success of an acquisition by culture and just like tactical, like sound execution, how much of it would be on either side? Does the question make sense? Like, is it like, can bad culture misalignment completely destroy an acquisition, even if it's logically sound?
I believe so. We haven't experienced it yet. I think it's because we've been so cautious and careful going in. But I definitely believe so. If we have a misalignment on that front, then, it's going to be 2 teams working against each other and not with each other. And that's kind of the unknown territory for us today, which is why I think we're very cautious in kind of those decisions.
I want to go back. We skipped over a little bit about your background. So I want to go back to that, but I want to start with, you mentioned you love sociology.
Yeah.
And it's because you love understanding why people are the way they are. Why is that? Because I love that too, for some reason. I just find it so fascinating.
Yeah, I can't point to why. It's just always been something that I've been very interested in. And a lot of it's the foundation of kind of what I do today on the marketing side. Understanding consumer behavior is a huge passion of mine. I'm not watching the Super Bowl commercials to see who had the best marketing campaign. I'm watching the Super Bowl commercials to see where innovation lies and how, larger marketing organizations have shifted their strategy to being able to adapt to consumer behavior. I early on, we kind of took a direction and a philosophy that Amazon is investing literal billions of dollars into shaping the way people buy products. They have trained the entire culture of today's society and, not going to the big box stores and making it super convenient to just, whether it's on your phone or on your computer, and now even on your TV, being able to order a product that you need, and they've made it very user-friendly. And so we've looked at that from that same approach. Our websites should function the same. They should feel the same. They should look the same, because Amazon's investing billions of dollars that now we don't have to invest into to train a consumer base. And so that's kind of what I find really fascinating in understanding, how different cultures operate. And I had the opportunity early on in my career to be able to travel internationally on our student housing side and work with clients and developers in, other countries to evaluate the need and evaluate adoption of student housing like we have in the US. And you go into South America and you look at markets like Bogota, Colombia. There's 250,000 students that go to school all within kind of call it a 10-mile radius of different campuses. They travel 2, sometimes 3 hours each way to get to class every day. And so you look at it from a surface level and take our American culture and think this is an untapped gold mine for being able to provide a student housing opportunity here where these students can be more focused on their academics, more focused on student life, and not be spending all of their time on a train coming in. Well, the reality is that when you get into the weeds and you start understanding the true culture, they're living at home because that's part of the culture. They're never going to live in student housing. They're never going to move out of the house until they get married. And that's just part of how they were raised. And that's part of kind of what their culture means. And so without knowing, the sociology behind it, you would never understand why it's structured the way it's structured.
That's so interesting. Yeah. And going back to the Amazon part, we call it like in our company, the Amazon disease, right? Mm-hmm. Because even renters expect immediate responses. They expect to be able to schedule tours because the culture is just like now. It's like TikTok and short form and slow attention spans, and everything needs to happen now. So it's interesting to hear that you guys also talk about it that way in your company.
Yeah.
Okay. So you said you had, let's start with where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Michigan. I spent my first 8 years in the Lower Peninsula, northern Lower Peninsula of Michigan. Kind of more in a vacation type town. My parents had me, I wouldn't say later on in life because I'm approaching that age now and I haven't had kids yet. But they had me when they were 39 and 40. So at that time, my father had been pretty successful in his career and he decided to retire, and we moved up to a lake house and sold our house down in, further south in the Lower Peninsula.
What did he do for work?
He was a dentist.
Okay.
But he happened to be a dentist who opened up a practice in Flint, Michigan 6 months before General Motors added dental insurance to their benefits. So he was kind of the only game in town when a bunch of factory workers that had never been to the dentist before all of a sudden could go to the dentist for free. And so he capitalized on opportunity pretty well. And so at 40, we moved up to what was kind of our vacation home. And it was in this vacation area. So it was this very, very exciting place during the summer, but very quiet town in the winter. And at 8 years old, my sister was a junior entering her senior year of high school. And she was a nationally ranked cross-country skier. She had been state champion, I think multiple times in Michigan. And she was training for the Olympics. And so my father and my sister moved up to a small town called Marquette, Michigan in the Upper Peninsula, which really, if I'm going to be honest, it should be part of Canada because it very much felt like Canada. It's further north than you should probably ever go in the winter. And they lived up there for a year. And then my mom and I decided that we were going to move up there as well. We thought it was going to be temporary until she graduated high school and kind of pursued her athletic career. And my brother had already gone off to college. And then we all kind of fell in love with it, and we all moved up together. And so from 8 until 16, I lived in Marquette, Michigan. Very, very sheltered town, very small town. And then when I was 16, my mom and I moved down to Florida because I had already decided that I wanted to go to school in Florida. My brother had gone to school in Florida. He was living in Florida at the time. My mother and father had divorced in that period. So my mom wanted to retire down there. And I just said, I'm going to go to school down there. Why not just go down there now and kind of make the transition a little bit easier? So when I was 16, I moved to Orlando and then ended up going to the University of Florida.
So I have two questions. One, how did your sister get into skiing? How
Yeah.
did she get so good?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. She has a lot of personality traits like my dad does when it comes to just kind of going all in on everything. And early on, she got introduced to cross country skiing, which
Your
is
dad has that personality too.
yeah, he did, and I think he kind of had to have that personality with just how successful he was in the dental world. But then when you're 40 years old and you all of a sudden don't have anything to do, he started finding hobbies and would just get hyper obsessed with them.
Wait, because he retired at 40?
He retired at 40,
Oh, that's interesting.
and
Because he'd done really well because of the insurance thing and decided to retire. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess you were just born, so you don't know what that experience was like.
yeah, I don't know what that experience was like, but I also look back and I never knew the experience of like what it was to have a dad that would go to work either. And so in a lot of ways that shaped kind of what not to do in my life. And I could never imagine, I just feel like inherently now seeing that happen, I have the fundamental thought that I will probably never retire.
So I want to, it's really, I have goosebumps for some reason because I had a very similar experience. So my dad retired when I was 11. And I, similar to you, did not ever really see him work. I mean, when I was younger, I don't remember as much, but from 11 onwards, he didn't have a formal job. And I don't know what your experience was like, but in some ways I also learned what not to do because I just saw how important it is to have something for your mental health and have something you're working towards. And maybe it's not work, but you need to have some like forward momentum purpose. Some people take religion as that purpose. Some people use their kids as that purpose, and others use work. But for me, it was such an eye-opening experience because I realized how important work is for your mental well-being and how you can just get lost when you don't have anything. In some ways, I think my dad, I'd be curious to hear what he says, but I think he thinks it was a good decision and made him more happy, but I feel like it probably made him less happy because we were also not in a good financial position. I grew up money was always a big issue. My dad didn't make it to my college graduation because we couldn't buy an $800 plane ticket. Like money was always a big thing and it was just a very stressful experience. So in many ways, like I also have that same, like I've learned what not to do.
Yeah.
What was your experience like?
No, very, very similar. My father retired in a time that, he felt like he was set for his life from a financial standpoint and set for the family. The reality of it is that in order to carry that out, you have to be relatively frugal for now the next 40 plus years that you're going to live. And so money was always a topic in my household as well, just because we didn't have that income coming in. It wasn't that we were financially unstable. It was, if we're going to continue to be financially stable, we're going to have to be really frugal. Part of me being the youngest of three growing up, I joke with my mom all the time and just give her a hard time and in good fun. She knows I'm joking with her, but I tell her often, I'm 30, almost 36 years old. I've never owned a new bicycle in my life. It's part of being the youngest and part of being part of a frugal family, right? I got the hand-me-downs. I never got anything new. And, there were times that like I unwrapped Christmas presents and I was like, I would ask my brother, like, was this yours at one point? And a lot of times it was. And so, I don't know, it kind of shaped the way I look at life, I think, a little bit differently. And, I love the perspective that you can have in knowing that whether it feels like a good thing or feels like a bad thing in the moment, like you don't know. It might have felt right in early childhood when certain things happened. And I look back at it now and I'm like, that was a pretty pivotal moment. That wasn't like a great situation that I was in. And I may have felt like something happened and it was the end of the world in the moment in my childhood. And I look back and I'm like, no, that shaped the way that I then started to look at things. And, similarly, when I was 16 and moved from Michigan to Orlando, we didn't have private schools in my hometown in Michigan. The education system locally was very good. I moved down to Orlando. We moved into a neighborhood that had yet to build a school system or school district for themselves. So I drove kind of 25 minutes further into town and went to a very diverse school. My graduating class in Michigan was going to be about 90 people. My 10th through 12th grade campus, they had a separate freshman campus because of the size. The 10th through 12th grade campus had 3,000 kids at it. And I went from 99.5% white in Michigan to 8% white at my high school. So in Orlando. And so that experience was a huge culture shock for me. It felt very much like college. And I remember coming home at times, like just absolutely defeated, worried about where I fit in. How was I going to navigate these next 2 years? Was this a mistake? Are there other alternatives that I can, finish out high school at? And over the course of the next 2 years, I look back now and it was the best thing that happened to me. Because I would have had to go through that culture shock regardless. I would have had to go through that transition regardless. And getting it done when I was 16 versus being 18 and trying to pursue my education at an even greater level, I'm inherently thankful for. And now I have a completely different view on the importance of the public school system.
Was it hard to make friends?
For the first probably 6 weeks, it was.
Yeah.
For the first time in my life, I'm walking around and nobody looks like me.
Yeah. So before that, you were it was like all, it was predominantly white, both in your school and in the city.
Yeah.
And then you go there's 8% white.
In probably 50% of the conversations that I would overhear were in Spanish. And so it felt like another world to me at that time. And so it was difficult. But what I feel like I did that I'm very thankful for and adapted well was that I became part of multiple friend groups in high school. And, I had the academically oriented kids. I had the athletically oriented kids. And I just had like the socially oriented kids that I was all kind of a part of. And that was really fulfilling for me to just be able to see life in a different perspective.
So were you pretty well balanced then?
Yeah.
In high school, you did academics, social life, and athletics.
Yeah. I had to give up athletics when I moved to Florida. I grew up playing ice hockey, and it's kind of difficult in Florida. I did continue to play hockey, but it wasn't anything that was sponsored by my high school. And so it was, I wasn't part of the athletic engagement in my high school, but I was friends with a lot of the athletes at the same time.
What is the experience like growing up with siblings that are 10 years older than you? Does that feel like you have 4 parents?
I would say yes. Yeah. My sister and my brother are very different. My sister has the ability to be a little bit more of a chameleon, I think. And, she would act 16 years old when she was around my brother and her friends, or in her day to day. She would act like she was 7 years old when she was with me. And so she has a really good ability to kind of adapt and be able to level with people. My brother, for sure, he was way more serious. He's still very serious. He went to the Air Force Academy and then had an injury and ended up going to Embry-Riddle down in Florida. And so he was always a little bit more academically focused, or more focused on like the future. So that was a good dynamic, I think, looking back at it, to grow up under. But yeah, in a lot of ways, I wouldn't necessarily say it was for parents as much as I would say, like, I had 2 built-in babysitters at all times. And they joke about it all the time.
That's
Like,
true.
I was just a nuisance to their social life.
How would they describe you and your personality?
Gosh, that's such a good question. Later on in life now, my sister comes to me for a lot of business advice. She was athletically oriented, but very book smart. She probably doesn't have the street smarts as much.
She was book smart and athletic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
She became a dentist as well, to follow in my dad's footsteps. And so I think I level with her a little bit more on the business side now to try to help her through kind of running her own business. My brother, he has a very linear kind of, well, I guess I should say more of a binary profession. He's an airline pilot now. So he clocks in, clocks out, doesn't have to worry about work afterwards. And so we have different relationships, but, I think if you were to ask them kind of how they describe me, it's, I would hope that they would reference my work ethic and motivation, because I don't want to stop working. And if I'm doing something, I want to put everything I have into it. But I'm also very opportunistic as well. Yeah, I think you have to be if you end up in this profession anyways.
So I think we touched on a little bit, but I'd love to hear a little more of your thoughts on you saying you learned what not to do from your dad retiring early. Why? Because you saw him stressed, or
No, I don't think he was ever stressed. So he has a very controlling personality. We've had primarily, like, I'm comfortable with saying this, we've had a pretty toxic relationship over the course of my life, and it's been very on and off at times. At times I've been very close to him. At other times I haven't spoken to him for years. And it comes down to control for him. And so I saw kind of the strain that put on the family dynamic, and learned a lot from that. I think that, as he found different passions and different things to occupy his time, I think that sometimes family was his passion. At other times, it wasn't even on his radar. And, it's just a lot about his personality. Now, my mother, on the other side, like, she's a very, very caring individual. Like, she's my rock. I can't do anything wrong in her eyes, which was a good balance when it came to the family dynamic, but I wish she'd be a little bit more critical over me. I hate going on Facebook because every time I open up Facebook, she's either talking about something that I did or something that my brother did. And I don't like a lot of that recognition, but she was a great balance and just super caring.
How do you feel like that's impacted you growing up? Because I see it both ways, where when your parent or parents give you a bunch of approval, in some ways it instills very deep confidence in you, right? On the other hand, you have examples where parents are never happy with their kids and they always expect more. And it kind of builds this like desire to like seek approval from them and from everybody else. How do you feel like your mom's unwavering, like, I guess, like, love for you and all that has impacted you?
Yeah, I think the seek approval side resonates with me well.
On your dad's side?
On my dad's side. And, I could go out and play the best hockey I've ever played. I could, get in the car after scoring 2 goals and having an assist or something along those lines. And, the 30-minute drive home was all about what I did wrong. And so that always, I think, has inherently motivated me to want to be better, whether it was healthy or not. And I work really well with individuals that kind of have that same mentality of just, you did great, but you need to continue to get better. On my mom's side, it gave me the comfort that I can make mistakes and I can take risks. I can kind of go at life without a whole lot of fear because she's always going to be there and always has been there for me. And I see that dynamic a lot in my wife as well. And
your
so
wife
it's
is
comforting.
similar to your mom's personality.
Yeah, I think she accepts people for who they are, which is, I think, her biggest personality trait. And what I love the most about her is that she's given me a much wider perspective over the acceptance of others and other viewpoints.
Where do you think your dad's like control, and how do you define control, I guess, personality? Where do you think it came from?
I think a lot of it came from his dad. I think that it was a family dynamic that kind of got passed down. They grew up in a different age and a different generation where I think control was kind of a part of daily life. But I think it was probably exponentialized a little bit more in his at-home lifestyle. His father passed away before I was born, and so I grew up with a step-grandfather that I knew as my grandfather. So I never got to really see it firsthand, but from where I understand, I think that family foundation was a little bit fractured.
And you feel like your relationship with him has been on and off because of this, like, because what I'm trying to understand is, what does control look like as a kid, I guess? Like, is it like you can't go out anywhere and you're going to do what I say? Or is it like, what does that look like, I guess?
For me, it looked like there was a predefined path. Like I had to hit certain marks and do certain things in the way that my dad envisioned. And in a lot of ways, he lived vicariously through his kids. That's where I think my sister was very, very involved in athletics and ended up getting burnt out and went the dentistry route. My brother had a similar off and on relationship. And when he went to the Air Force Academy, that was great. When he got hurt and decided not to return for his second year, that was a problem because that wasn't what my father had envisioned for him. And for me, it was a much more unconventional path that I took. I've been opportunistic. I went to school for mechanical and aerospace engineering. That's why I wanted to go to Florida in the first place. And I saw the automotive field shift, and that's ultimately what my passion was and where I wanted to go, and decided to move more towards a business route. And those decisions are not autonomous in his world. That should be a decision that he makes and that he talks me through. And so I've always been one to want to blaze my own trail. And if we kind of look through my history of the positions that I've worked in and the things that I've done just at Asset Living, I haven't worked in a position that existed before I got into it, dating all the way back to 2012 or 2011. And so that's inherently kind of who I am, and that just didn't mesh well.
Do you think that's tied to the fact of like wanting to, if your dad or whoever wanted you to do something, you wanted to do something completely different? Do you think that's reflected in your work life as well as a living, or is that just a happy coincidence?
I think it's a happy coincidence. I don't think that it's anything. I've been so lucky to have mentors in my life, in my professional life, that have helped me find opportunities where I can add value, and not just be something that already exists and try to be the best at it, but really look for opportunities to be able to add value in unconventional ways. And so I think that's a little bit more of it. I had more of a passion or kind of thought and path that I wanted to go down in real estate property management that was completely different from what I ended up doing. But that's because my mentors kind of helped me through that process.
Mm. So you mentioned your parents divorced when you were 16.
They divorced when I was 13.
When you were 13. Was that tough?
It was. But at the same time, I saw how much happier my mom was. And I don't think it really changed my dad's attitude at all. It was tough in the sense of, as a 13 to 16-year-old, every other week you're at a different house. You're having to kind of spend your Sunday evenings transitioning between those houses. Like that part of it, I think everybody in that scenario goes through and can kind of point towards it being tough. Outside of that, I saw how much happier my mom was and how much more opportunity she had in life to express who she was and kind of pursue things that she was interested in, that made it worth it.
And do you identify as the younger sibling? Does the question make sense? Like, there's the stereotypes for all. I'm a middle child, right? So I have an older sister and a younger brother. And I would say I probably identify as a middle child. Like that makes sense. Like, does the younger child role make sense for you?
Yeah. When I kind of look back and look at the perspective of kind of how our family dynamic is now, I'm the loudest in rooms when the family gets together. I've kind of always been the one that gets the most attention, especially early on, because I was in a completely different stage in my life than my siblings as well. I think so. I think it's shaped my personality more than anything.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I want to talk about, so you went to college in Florida, you did mechanical and aerospace engineering. Why? You were always interested in math and science?
Yeah, I was always a numbers oriented person.
Okay.
In middle school, I think I was in 6th grade in competing at like a high school math competition level. It's pretty, I think it's pretty telling if you look at like my SAT scores. I think I got a 790 out of 800 on math, and I think I got a 500 on English.
Okay.
And so that's kind of who I am,
Yeah.
or who I've always been. And so that was a pretty straightforward route for me to go. But I also had a pretty strong interest in cars growing up. I was just kind of a big car junkie, and that always fascinated me, and I wanted to get into the automotive industry. And so that was a pretty easy path. Florida had a dual major program for mechanical and aerospace. Otherwise, I wouldn't have even entertained aerospace, but it was a good program to go into.
Why did you want to get into cars? Because you enjoyed cars growing up?
Yeah, I enjoyed cars growing up, all aspects of cars. Early on, I was, watching Formula One. I remember like as a kid, the big controversy of like Juan Pablo Montoya moving from Formula One at BMW to NASCAR. Those were the things that I was watching on the weekends when, my dad and my family was watching football. But I also, my best friend growing up in Michigan too, his father was a professional race car driver, and he became a professional race car driver. And so I mentioned to you when we talked before we started recording, the RV life. I drove from Minnesota to LA and back in an RV with my best friend because he was competing in the X Games. And so being around that too, just amplified it.
What was your college experience like?
College was great. I love Gainesville. Think awesome town, fosters a lot of diversity and creativity, big social aspect. When I went freshman year, I joined Society of Automotive Engineers, SAE. I wanted to get into their formula program. Very quickly learned that, I was just a grunt as a freshman, and I was spending hours like making washers on a CNC mill, like doing just what I felt like wasn't fulfilling. And so I kind of got away from that early on. Kind of the social scene, I mentioned in high school, like I loved being part of diverse social groups, like gravitated to that a little bit more. And that didn't exist in the engineering college as prevalently as probably the business college. So I had a diverse group of friends as well in college. But when I was a freshman going into my sophomore year, I signed a lease at a new development that was in town for a student housing community. And as I was filling out my paperwork, they're like, "Hey, you're really outgoing. Would you be interested in working here?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. Like, I'm going to get free rent. I'm going to live here for free, and you guys are going to give me a paycheck if I work over so many hours and some commission, and if I get my friends to sign leases. Like, it sounds like a pretty good deal." And so as I made that transition, that was kind of my first taste of the business setting. And at that time, it was 2007 going to 2008, and the world crashed. The automotive industry crashed. My brother-in-law is actually, at the time, he was a mechanical engineer for Nissan outside of Detroit. And Nissan didn't lay off anybody, but Ford and GM laid off thousands of engineers. And he kind of gave me the perspective. He was like, "I know you want to pursue this, but you're not going to get into the automotive space anytime soon. It'll probably be 10 years. You'll work for some consulting firms, and then maybe they'll start hiring again." So I took a step back and kind of thought about, what is my college experience like? What do I like most about it? I love the business aspect. I love the social aspect of it. And that's when I made the decision to kind of switch to business and focus on business management.
Oh, so you changed your major in
I
college?
changed my major
Okay.
my sophomore year.
Your sophomore year. Okay, cool. So you got into, and remind me which year you got the leasing. It
was May of 2008.
And that was your sophomore. You said
I was finishing up my freshman year going into sophomore year.
okay. So it was a part-time. So then after you graduated, you took a full-time role.
Yeah, I actually took a full-time role my senior year. The beauty of the business school at Florida, and they were kind of ahead of their time, I feel like, at that moment, was that all of the classes in the business school were primarily online. They had physical lecture halls that you would go to, but all of those lectures were recorded and posted instantly online. So I had a flexibility in my schedule that kind of midway through my junior year, going into my senior year, I started working full time. I actually joined Asset February of my last semester and worked full time in a management position.
Interesting. Okay. And as you joined full time into the industry, what was your thinking like? Were you like, oh, I want to build a career in multifamily, or what was your mindset?
No, I thought it was, great pay for being a 21, 22-year-old. I really had no idea what I wanted to do after graduation. And so this was just kind of something to occupy my time. As soon as I graduated, I was asked to move to San Diego for the summer and kind of fix a lease up that had gone wrong, that was under development, and spent 3 months out there. It was an amazing summer. It was awesome. I wasn't looking at other job opportunities. I was just kind of seeing what was going to come to me next through this path. And then I started moving all across the country for multiple years from there. I think at one point when I moved to Houston, I kind of woke up one day and I was like, no, this is actually what I want to do. I haven't been motivated to look at other options for the past 2 years, and that probably is pretty telling.
How do you, when you think about, so how many years, you're about 14 years into your career?
Yeah. Well, right 14 at Asset.
14 at Asset.
Yeah. Started in 2008 in the industry.
And you've been at Asset ever since?
Yeah. Ever since.
That's
11.
so uncommon, I feel like, right? To stay at a company for that long.
Yeah. I think a lot of what we talked about earlier, though, just kind of it being
different roles.
An open book as to opportunity. And, if you have the mentality that you want to make the organization better, you can really do anything you want. I also think that, our culture is a big driver of it. I've never really felt like I'm working. I feel like my wife always makes these comments. I'll be on the road, 30 to 35 weeks a year. And sometimes I'll vent to her and I'll just be like, it is really tiring at moments to continually be on the road. And she always tells me, she's like, you're not working. You're going and hanging out in LA with your friends. Like you're going to San Francisco and hanging out with your friends. But that's really how it feels.
Where do you think Asset Living is headed next?
Yeah.
Like what's the goal? Is it to just keep growing and expanding?
Yeah, strategically.
Yeah.
We're not just looking for blind growth. We're looking for how can we expand our presence across the pockets in the country that we don't have a presence. How can we continue to be, one of the best and eventually be the best operator in the country, kind of at a more widespread scale. I think we do a really, really great job at managing that A to C class product and that affordable product. And now, kind of alternative products like BTR and being specialist in student housing. And even when co-living was kind of a thing, we were one of the early adopters in co-living and felt like we were pretty nimble to be able to make an impact there. But for us, we want to be the best operator. We don't necessarily want to be the biggest. I think as a product of trying to be the best, we've become one of the biggest. And I think that you'll see, over the next few years that we're going to continue to grow.
So I feel like you're incredibly young to have such a senior role. And obviously that comes with more responsibility, more money, ideally. How much is money a driver for you?
I'm glad you asked that question. Early on in my career, it was a driver. I think when I was more materialistic, when I was in my mid-20s and, always maintain that passion for cars. Like I always thought about, if I had some more money, I could buy that car. Or if I had some more money, I could live in that place instead of the place I'm living in. But it was very materialistic. And when I achieved some of those things, like it's not fulfilling at all. You just continually want more. And at one point I had to kind of take a step back and snap myself out of it and say, this isn't doing anything for me at the end of the day. And I'm a firm believer now that if you find things that you're passionate about and you just try to continue to be the best and improve every day, the money will come But there's no data to show that somebody who makes hundreds of thousands of dollars are happier than an individual that's making, in that 70 to 80 range. And you want to use money to be able to facilitate what you do in life that you love. And it is a necessity at the end of the day. But for me, early on, I saw how it affected my happiness when it was a motivator. And I kind of vowed to never make it a motivator again.
Yeah, I like that. My view on money has totally changed as well. I mentioned I grew up financially insecure, so I thought security was financial security. So that was kind of my initial what I strived for. And what I realized was that really, to me, money, I don't know what number it is. It could be 70K, it could be 700K, but I think the idea that I'm mentally free is most important. For example, growing up, I would never, when we go out to a restaurant, like we would never get appetizers or drinks. It would always just be the entree. It would be the main course. That wasn't a thing. You wouldn't get like the appetizer. You wouldn't do all this stuff. You get your entree and you're good.
Like a very 90s middle class thing.
Yeah. And you'd look at like I'd look at the prices and see the most expensive one and be like, damn, I kind of want that, but I can't. And all this stuff. And I feel like now, like what I've realized, to me, financial security is like, can I go to a restaurant and just like look at the thing I want and get it without looking at the price? And to me, it's like mental freedom. Do I have to like optimize for the cheapest gas station, or can I just like go to the one that's most convenient for me? And I think money is really powerful when it can provide this like convenience, because to me, it feels like it just feels light mentally. Yeah. And maybe it's because I'm spending so much of my waking time and energy and hours on building this company that I don't want to spend any other resources, like mental resources, on like these small optimizations. And if I was less preoccupied with work, maybe that would change. But I think money is really useful for convenience. I think about like, it would be awesome to have like a private chef that like cooked your meals and like optimized your macros and all that. I'm like, damn, that would be a great use of money. So I think there's like ways you can spend money that are like extremely useful for you. But like the traditional sense of like, blowing money on nicer materialistic cars and upgrading from the Porsche to the Ferrari to the Lamborghini, that probably has like massively diminishing returns.
Yeah. And you look at it, like think about the home you live in. There's not really inherently any advantage from having a 3-bedroom home, even as a family, to a 6 or 7-bedroom home. It all just becomes materialistic at that point. You start to kind of build your life around material things. I just moved a year and a half ago after living in a home for almost 6 years. And the massive amount of things that you accumulate in 6 years, like we were so happy to just throw a lot of things away. And it gave us a reset on kind of how we furnish our next home and what we prioritize in that. But it's a totally diminishing return. Material things are truly material, and there's not a whole lot of fulfillment there.
Yeah, I think the other thing that people miss is like, it also like a lot of things normalize, right? Like you think about an experience that you thought was amazing or an item you purchased, and how often do you feel the same when the same way you felt right after you purchased that item, right? I think even a nice house normalizes. Like you're gonna like, I'm living in this RV. That's one of the insights I've had moving from my 1-bedroom apartment where I have like my own bathroom. And of course it's like, it's nicer to have your own bathroom and all that stuff. But like, I don't feel materially that different living in this RV, sharing all this space. In some ways it's like kind of more freeing. Right? I have my kitchen here, we can move around, and it's almost cemented this idea in my mind in a good way and reinforced that like, life experiences just normalize. Like material things just normalize. You live in the experience, and then after a couple of days, it's like, this is just my life. Like, I don't know.
Well, it all goes back to dopamine, right?
Yeah.
Like what gives you that high? And if you're basing that high off of material milestones, like moving into a new home or buying a new car or buying something that, has no real value to your life, you're never going to get away from that. And you're never going to win at that game either. from a professional perspective, like the thing that I hope to have for the rest of my life is that dopamine driver of feeling that high when I accomplish something that affects other people in a very positive way, giving opportunities to my team the same way that I had opportunities throughout my career, super important to me. And that's one of the most fulfilling things I can do in life. Inevitably, I hope to become a parent, and there are things that I need to prioritize and make sure like that motivates me. But when you are getting a high off of things that are making your life arguably worse, you're in a really bad spot. And that could be anything from drugs to short form content, like we've seen it affect individuals. And now they're obsessed and addicted to their phone or their devices and this immediate demand because it's dopamine. The same thing happens in video games, which can be a really debilitating thing for people.
Regarding kids, do you feel like you are waiting for a new season of your life to like? What's your thinking there?
Yeah, my wife and I have never been in a rush. She grew up here in Houston. She grew up in the typical kind of Texas culture where people went off to college, they got married, they came back, had kids immediately. She took a different route. She went to Penn State, so she grew. She for 4 years spent her time with her closest friends that were all from New York City, New Jersey, East Coast, who have a completely different culture and mentality. So that kind of reset her look. And when she moved back to Texas, and we met shortly after she moved back to Texas, she didn't have this desire to rush into it, and I didn't really have that desire either. It was more of like being a product of your environment. It felt like we should have kids, but when we talked about it, we weren't ready for it. And I think we're just kind of trying to find the right time in our life. And I think it'll be pretty soon coming up. Clock's ticking relatively from a biological standpoint, but you shouldn't rush into anything that you're not comfortable or ready for just because other people are doing it.
Alex, thank you for joining me today. I feel like the conversation was super smooth and really easy. You're super easy to talk to, and it's fun for me to do these because I don't know a lot about the person like going in, right? It's not like I'm interviewing Elon Musk where I can like watch hundreds of videos and read his biography and all this stuff. It's like I don't know a lot about people, so it's really fun to like discover in real time and hear the story in real time. So thank you for that.
No, thank you for having me. This was great.
Awesome. Thanks, man.